All right, so before we jump into laser aesthetics, let's talk a little bit about what kind of treatments do lasers provide, right? So 10, 15 years ago, one of the most well-known type of laser treatments was the IPL, or is the IPL, which stands for intense pulse light. It allows you to treat a variety of conditions, inclusive of reds and browns. So in other words, pigmented lesions or vascular, type of characteristics, like telangiectasias, broken vessels, rosacea, and yet that would have to do with the skin, but things have progressed so much, just even in the last 10 to 15 years, and so has the innovations. And now we're treating skin, first tightening. We're able to destroy fat through radiofrequency, through either, through cold sculpting, through ultrasound. We're doing muscle tightening now. We can improve the skin with CO2 fractional lasers ablating the skin. We have plasma technologies that are non-ablative. We can treat, with skin with Nd:YAG lasers and alexandrite lasers and erbium lasers. The list goes on and on. So then the question is like, where do I get started? What's the best laser? What do I use? What's the best treatment? And let's just kind of walk through some of these things to really help you gain a level of comfort. It might sound really, really complicated, but trust me, it's not. The fact that you've gone through 8 years of school to even, get to the point of being an RN or an NP or or as a medical doctor, even more years of school, it's not as daunting as what it sounds like. There are several different manufacturers out there in the world. There's companies like Cynosure, Luminous, Inmo, Cutera, Alma Lasers, to name just a few. I've been, just glad to be able to partner with a company called MD360, where we've helped launch brand new innovations into the U.S. marketplace. And that's the thing about this, you guys, is there's so many different technologies and innovations out there in the world. Now it's like, what best fits what you need? All right, so some of the treatments that we're going to talk about are hair removal and the distinctions between, what lasers are needed for hair removal based off of the Fitzpatrick. So in other words, the Fitzpatrick scale is on a basis of 1 through 6. It has to do with the melanin in somebody's skin tone, right? So a really great example of a skin type 1 would be somebody with really ultra white skin. Am I allowed to say people's actors' names? Like a Nicole Kidman, for instance, would be a really great example of really white skin. So somebody with Irish descent, Swedish descent, or ethnicity, right? Somebody with blue eyes, red hair, that's typically they're gonna have really, really white skin. And then on the opposite of that would be a skin type 6, which will be somebody that has really dark skin. And even when we're talking about dark skin, there's even gradations of melanin within dark skin. And I don't know, Seal maybe would be a really great example as a musician who is a skin type 6. And depending on, that's really going to influence the type of laser treatment that we may consider, right? And so as we get into that, we'll walk a little bit more into the Fitzpatrick skin types. And unfortunately, you guys can't see what my PowerPoint presentation of the different skin types. Your skin type 1 is going to be a very light white skin, as I mentioned, a Celtic maybe background. Then you go to a skin type 2, which is going to be more of your light or light-skinned European. Level 3 is going to be your light to intermediate or dark-skinned European. And then we start getting into a little bit of the darker or more tan olive skin types. A skin type 4 may be, you're somebody with a South American, Spanish descent, you name it. Then you go into your 5s and 6s, which could be Middle Eastern, and then you name it to African heritage. So there's all these different, skin types. Now it's like, okay, how do I choose which laser to use? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Radio frequency, for instance, which is really, really hot right now. I'm sure all you guys have been hearing the craze about RF microneedling, super popular type of procedure right now in the aesthetic space. Well, RF doesn't see color. So it doesn't necessarily have an affinity necessary to pigmentation and or water. I guess maybe since I'm on that topic, let's talk a little bit about target points, or what we would call chromophores, right? Chromophores, well, there's 3 specific chromophores. And in other words, that has to do with the attraction of light and or energy to the melanin or a target point, something that has color in the skin. Well, we know that blood, has color, right? So is that deoxyhemoglobin or oxyhemoglobin is an attractive point for certain types of laser wavelengths. Well, we know pigment, right? Which is basically stimulated by the melanocytes in our skin or different conditions, whether it be, because of sunspots, age spots, solar lithogenes, melasma, the list goes on and on. Well, that's gonna be an attraction or a target point for certain types of lasers, right? And then tertiarily is water, right? And our bodies are made up quite a bit characteristically of water. And so there's certain types of lasers that are very attracted or have an affinity to that type of chromophore or that target point. Point being is then, therefore, if we're going to utilize, say, a ND-YAG, a 1064 wavelength, and again, we'll get into a little bit more about this. Right now, I just want to keep this, kind of high level, basic, elementary. Let's not just get into the woods here, because there is a science to this, and I don't want you to freak out today. Right now, I just want you to get your feet wet, get a feel of what are chromophores, what are lasers, what do they do, what are they attracted to, what are the do's and what are the don'ts. And look, I had the opportunity to partner with Tiffany when she first jumped into this. She had mentioned earlier in this segment about injectables. Everybody wants to jump into injectables first. But I'll tell you what, one of the best ways to get into aesthetics is through the laser route. And that's how she got started. That was one of the things that she did. It was actually starting with hair removal, right? Learning about skin types, how to segment or distinguish the segmented different Fitzpatricks. You remember that, Tiffany? And look, to think where she's gone from then to now is extraordinary. She's like on the fast track. Point being though, is a 1064 has an affinity for water, right? And I'll go ahead and, if you could see the PowerPoint presentation here, you're gonna see that there's this wavelength of broken down into regions. These regions are what we're gonna determine as your spectral wavelengths. All a wavelength is basically there's the peaks and valleys that separate the spacing between light intermissions. And so anything that's going to be above that 1,000 range, or what we know as the 1064, has an infinity or a target point for things that are water based. So in other words, that's not going to be necessarily as aggressive on dark black skin, for instance, right? And so, for instance, when we're doing hair removal, which is, by the way, outside of Botox and filler, as according to, I think it's the American Society of Plastic Surgery, I hope my reference is correct there, that is still outside of those, the injectables, is the #1 high demand laser procedure in the United States to this day. It's still one of the hottest things. Like, what woman doesn't want to have to shave her legs every single day? Like the reality is after 3 to 6 treatments and then never have to shave again is like a godsend, right? And the same things goes for guys, right? Like, some of us men that have quite a bit of hair on the back or on the back of the neck, right? The idea of being able to have a laser procedure done where you never have to shave back there or feel conscientious about hair growth over your collar. Amazing, like, hello. So so with that is somebody with a little bit darker skin type with an affinity to water, I can use a hair removal device with a 1064 wavelength to treat that type of patient. Now, the opposite is true, okay? So when we're talking about somebody with white skin or Fitzpatrick skin types 1 through 3, then we're gonna need to get a little bit deeper into the skin to be able to break down the hair follicle, right? And actually try to collapse some of the vessels that creates hair growth, for instance. And so a 755 is actually going to be attracted to pigment and blood as well, a little bit of both. And in doing so, it's able to capture and trap those vessels, shut them down, that actually give the vascularity to the bulbus that creates follicular growth. Again, so there's all these different wavelengths, and the spectral wavelengths will be down as, and this would fall within a visible spectral wavelength. So it goes as low as 400, and it can go up to over 1,000. All right. I hope that makes sense with you guys. Again, once we get you in here, you get your hands-on didactics, you get to play with the lasers, and then you get official training, you'll be able to start distinguishing some of these aspects of laser medicine. But for the sake of just a quick kind of synopsis here, there's different wavelengths that will reach different depths of the skin. Here's another really great diagram for you students here that actually can see the screen at the moment. This is the depth of penetrations by various lasers. So your 532 KTP, you see that it doesn't travel super deep, that it actually goes down past the stratum corneum into the epidermis. And then you have some of your pulse dye lasers, the PDL, that's kind of what it stands for there, which is your 585 to 600 wavelengths. And there are a variety of lasers that will offer you those kind of wavelengths, whether they're pico lasers, Q-switch lasers, IPL lasers, and there's going to be different characteristics of why you would use various lasers for various conditions. So in other words, an IPL is not going to be able to remove tattoos for you, for instance, right? You're going to need an ultra-fast wavelength. So remember how I talked about peaks and valleys? Well, you need something really short, really fast to be able to grind out. Think of like a coffee grinder, right? And if I'm making an espresso, I'm going to have it to a really fine, kind of grain to be able to break up some of that pigmentation. But in the same token, if I use something with a much longer wavelength or like a pulse dye, I'm able to break down the little sunspots and some of the brown kind of spots that may predominantly be an effect of, aging skin, the sun, and even hormonal issues. And that's where we'll see melasma as one of those issues that a lot of us face in the aesthetic space. And then again, so as we're progressing upwards, we have the ruby laser, or at least that ruby wavelength that you don't really see all that often anymore. It's a 600, around that kind of high-end 600 wavelength up to about that 700 range, that ruby to alexandrite. And that's going to be an affinity to, again, towards pigment and even, vascular type of conditions. Now we're going to talk maybe just, I guess for the sake of it, the 800 wavelength. You're not going to get a lot of solid state lasers that will hit that wavelength, but what you do get is the diode laser. That's something that's somewhat new. It's a little probably about 10, maybe 12 years old, but the whole concept with the diode, excuse me, I'm fumbling over my words, but it's actually mimicking a wavelength. So a laser, for instance, like a diode laser for hair removal, they'll use small little kind of glass bars that will mimic a particular wavelength. And you may even be able to get a chance, depending on what location you get some of these didactics. Gifty is not shy about her lasers. She's big on lasers. She's big on having an armamentarium of whatever we need in order to be able to give the patients the best result. So she's got several solid state lasers for hair removal, for instance, but she also has a diode laser for hair removal, just depending on what is necessary to get the job done. The point being is that the diode is a mimic light, but it does give you certain wavelengths that will help, get rid of hair, for instance, and particularly the darker skin types where maybe we don't want to be as aggressive because we don't want to create, any kind of hyperpigmentation, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, those kind of things, especially with darker skin types. And then we have the Nd:YAG, as I have mentioned already, the 1064. It's kind of like the go-to in just about every med spa. You can treat light skin, you can treat dark skin with it, and there's going to be a variety of different wavelengths in a 1064. And so this is something when I first started a decade ago, I'm like, wait a minute, 1064, like, hello, I don't understand this. Like, you can use a 1064 for hair removal, but then you can use a 1064 to destroy pigment, and then yet you can use a 1064 for tattoos. Oh, like what do you mean? How does this all work? Again, when we get into the 201 and our 301 courses, you'll learn more about these different lasers and what's going to be the best fit for you.